Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And by the way, before I continue, I just want to say thank you so very much for all of you who have expressed well wishes for me in regard, in regard to my health. You know, a pancreatic issue is certainly one that's troubling. I was, as I mentioned earlier, very, very pleased with the fact that the doctor said, you know, at this point, we're not going to worry about it. Now, I hope he wasn't being cavalier or indifferent, right? And I have to tell you, here we are Thursday, and after filming on Monday, man, I got sick. I mean, I got really, really sick. Now, I don't think it was pancreas at all. I think it was a little stomach virus that came raging through right here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. That is happening right now. But, I mean, I felt like the proverbial truck ran over the top of me, backed up and did it all over again 2 or 3 different times. I wound up sleeping a grand total of 15 or 16 hours when I was sick. So anyway, nonetheless, feel great today. I'm thankful to that. And again, thank you so very much for all of you for expressing your well wishes and your prayers for my health. It truly is honestly appreciated. All right. Yesterday, I gave you an assignment, and that is to read the interpretation of the vision of Daniel chapter 7, 1 to 14. Now, notice Daniel said he had a dream and visions. Now, let me say this again. Efforts are sometimes made. Now, the claim is idiosyncratic. It's almost unprecedented that we are told by some former preterists that, well, Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14 is a parenthetical insert into the text. It's not part of the dream or the visions in this regard, and that is what they're saying is, okay, Daniel 7, 1 to 12, that's one vision of a sequence of events, but in verse 13 and 14, that's another vision of another time period of different events. And so they justify that by the word visions, plural. Well, unfortunately, when you go to Daniel chapter 2 and the earlier chapters in the book of Daniel, you will find that exact same terminology being used of a singular dream being referred to as visions. It's a Hebraism. It is not saying, well, you know, in the night I had a bunch of different dreams unrelated to each other, and they all relate to different people, different times, different events. No, that is not the way that terminology is used in the book of Daniel. That argument is a theological invention contrived to try to avoid the obvious. And that is that the coming of the Son of Man in Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14 is set within the context, the framework of the judgment of the little horn. Now what that means is, ladies and gentlemen, when those same individuals turn around and they say, well, Daniel 7, 13 and 14, that was fulfilled in the ascension of Christ. Well, let me make 1 or 2 very, very quick observations. The perspective of Daniel chapter 7 is certainly from the heavenly vision perspective. Daniel is seeing the Ancient of Days. He's seeing the 10,000 times 10,000 times 10,000. Okay, that's a heavenly scene. And the coming of the Son of Man is to him, and that is in the heavenly realm from that perspective. A strange thing happens, however. In trying to make that strictly and exclusively and solely a reference to Christ's ascension, you have to ignore completely and totally the New Testament application of Daniel chapter 7. Not only that, you have to absolutely, totally ignore the interpretation of the vision. Now, folks, don't you think that if heaven, if God himself gives us the interpretation of the, quote, visions, that really ought to settle the issue? Don't you think? I would certainly think so. But instead, those who try to make the argument that I've already mentioned, they remove Daniel 7, 13, and 14 completely, totally, and entirely from the interpretation of the vision. Now, to say that's a strained interpretation is a humongous understatement. But let's read together Daniel 7, 15 and following, remembering what it specifically says. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one and those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. Notice, of all of this. All of what? Of the visions. Not some of it. Not a little bit of it. Not all of it except a little bit of it. I wanted to know what all of it meant. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Well, what is the antecedent of these things? It clearly involves the coming of the Son of Man to receive the kingdom. And the little horn. And the judgment of the little horn. How do I know that? Well, let's see. Those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. So that tells us that the antecedent of these things is inclusive of the four beasts, starting with Babylon. This cannot be denied. And that means that all these things goes all the way back to verse 1 and following. But watch this. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast. See, he's still talking about verses 1 to 12. Which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth and its iron, its teeth of iron and nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, trampled the residue with its feet, and the 10 horns which are on its head, the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth, which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. That's the little horn. So now the angel is explaining to Daniel the meaning of the vision that absolutely includes the vision of the little horn. I was watching, and the same horn, the little horn, was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. Now, folks, you got to catch this. You have the little horn that comes up through the 3, comes up through the 4, actually. And in the days of the 4th empire, he persecutes the saints. And he prevailed against them. Watch verse 22. This is the killer, as it were. He was prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Now, if you are going to make Daniel chapter 7, 1 to 12, refer to the time period before the ascension, then you've got to have this little horn persecuting the saints and prevailing against them, and you have to have the judgment of the little horn before the coming of the Son of Man. But wait a minute. It is at the destruction of the little horn that the kingdom is bestowed. When is the kingdom bestowed? Oh, at the coming of the Son of Man. As I mentioned yesterday, when we read the vision, Daniel chapter 7, 1 to 12, and if we follow that narrative in sequential chronological order, the coming of the Son of Man is the climactic event of the judgment of the little horn. It is not temporally divorced from the judgment of the little horn. Now, watch this. This little horn prevailed against the sons of man, against the saints, until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was given in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time for the saints to possess the kingdom. Then he said, the fourth kingdom, or fourth beast, shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from his kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first one, shall subdue 3 kings, shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High. The little horn becomes the penultimate persecutor of the saints. Now that means it cannot be referring to the time prior to the ascension. It has to refer to a time subsequent to the ascension. And that means that these people absolutely must be able to definitively prove that the ascension is this interpolation, parenthetical insertion, and it is unrelated to the judgment of the little horn. Well, you know what that means? That means that the vision of verse 13 and 14 is unrelated in any way, shape, form, or fashion to the time of the little horn, to the persecution of the saints, to the judgment of the little horn. And for that matter, it could be argued it is unrelated to the time in which the saints would inherit the kingdom. Because you see, Daniel 7, 13 and 14 has the Son of Man receiving the kingdom. Daniel 7, 26 and following has the saints receiving the kingdom. Those are synchronous events, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, many scholars have taken note of the fact that the saints here are the personification of the Son of Man, and the Son of Man in verse 13 and 14 is the personification of the people. And that's good Hebraic thought. But do you see the power of this? The attempt to make the ascension fulfilled, or as the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, flies in the face of the interpretation of the vision of Daniel 7, 1 to 12. Well, folks, when verse 13 or 15 and following tells us that it is the interpretation of all of these things, and it itemizes the list of everything that it's talking about, and that itemized chronological list matches Daniel 7, 1 to 12, then you have no ground whatsoever for saying that verse 13 and 14 is excluded from the interpretation. And if verse 13 and 14 is part of the interpretation of verse 15 and following, or to state it another way, if verses 15 and following are an interpretation of verse 13 and 14, then that means there is simply no way in this world, contextually, exegetically, logically, and consistently, to make the ascension to be the fulfillment of Daniel 7, 13, and 14. And you know what that means? It means that the coming of the Lord of Daniel 7 to receive the kingdom is not Christ's ascension into the heavens. It means it is his coming in judgment of Israel for shedding the blood of the saints. And next Monday, I will continue this theme and drive home the point that the interpretation and the vision agree 100% that the coming of the Son of Man to receive the kingdom is the time of the judgment of Israel in AD 70. You know what that means? It means that the vision of the coming of the Son of Man for the wedding, the coming of the Son of Man as the absent master, and the coming of the Son of Man in his kingdom, in the glory of his Father, the glory of his kingdom, Matthew 25, 31 and following, was in AD 70. And the Olivet Discourse cannot be divided. Out of time. Listen, tomorrow we're going to conclude our study and our refutation of the book by Mr. Kyle Pope, Thinking About AD 70. This will make 20 videos, if my numbering is correct, in review and refutation of that book. We're going to introduce, we're only going to very, very briefly have a few comments about some of the things that Mr. Pope mentions in the final half of the book, and then we're going to conclude with the summary of the things that we have seen. So you don't want to miss it. I'll see you on the flip side.